Hello, thanks for checking out my video. Today we're going to be working on our fine motor skills with writing utensils, with our paintbrush, with our scissors, with our glue stick, and we're going to be developing some visual motor integration skills as we trace along this traceable template to ultimately create a turkey that looks something like this, but with our plate and with our template on our cardstock paper. So the first step for me is to paint my paper plate and allow it some time to dry. So I'm going to clear the rest of my items out of my visual field so that I can fully concentrate on the paper plate and the task of painting it. So I will remove all of this, get it off to the side. Here's my plate. And I don't need scissors or glue at the moment. And I will begin painting. When I begin painting, I want to be aware of where I place my paintbrush in my hand. So ideally, I'd like to have it in between my thumb and my index finger, resting here in this thenar web. I can start by pinching and then pinch the paintbrush. This will facilitate a dynamic tripod grasp with some good radial precision if we're going to be painting in small spaces, but we can use a brush grasp if we need to, or a grasp with extended fingers to paint some of these larger areas. The next thing I want to be aware of is the placement of my paint. If I am a right hand dominant person, I want to have my paint on the left side of my body so that I have to reach across the midline of my body to locate the paint and then dip it in the paint to then paint back towards the midline of my body here with this paper plate target. So I'm a right-handed dominant person, so I'm going to put my paint on the left side and I will begin painting. I really want to focus on stabilizing my paper plate with my non-dominant hand as I begin my painting of the paper plate. As we're painting, we want to be aware of the brush stroke that we are completing here. So if we're working on our vertical strokes, maybe for some pre-writing strokes, we can work on vertical strokes. If we're working on some horizontal strokes, we can work horizontally across the plate. And then as we're working on ascending and descending arcs, it would be a good time to paint around the edges of the paper plate. Now I can go ahead and finish up the rest of it. Now I can push my paper plate off to the side and let it dry so that I can work on some other components of the activity here, like the tracing and visual motor integration component. So here I have the cardstock paper with some tracing lines on it. These will be my feathers, and then this one will be my face, neck, nose, and eyes. Before I start tracing, if I want to add some extra visual cues to my paper, I can do that. I can go ahead and take a highlighter pen and trace around along my dotted lines here to provide a little bit of an extra visual cue for my student. And then they can use these highlighted lines as just a really bright contrasting line to then trace over. So they will go ahead and complete this part. If you wanted to prepare the activity by using a highlighter pen, that would be a good idea. And then they can just trace within the highlighted area. If your student has a little bit more advanced visual motor integration skills, maybe we want to just leave the dots there and then they can connect the dots like so, or maybe we can just add a little bit of a visual cue every other dot or so, just about like that, just so that we're staying on track as we go from highlighted dot to highlighted dot, and then also through this just regular non-highlighted dot. And as we work on our feathers here and our tracing with the feathers, we really want to be sure that we use our non-dominant hand to stabilize the paper, and we want to be sure that we are holding our writing utensil or writing instrument with maybe a little bit more of a mature grasp. So really focusing in on using the fingertips to hold the writing instrument down towards the bottom of the pen or marker or crayon or whatever you're using. And we're not holding it with the entirety of our palm and scribbling. We're using a little bit more precision. So make sure we orient our writing instrument correctly before we go ahead and finish our tracing of the feather lines. And that should do the trick right there. Now I can go ahead and complete my other page of feathers. And I can do the same with my face, nose, and eyes. So I will use my highlighter pen. Again, that really worked out well for me. I'm going to trace around the dots before my student traces on top of the highlighted line. Again, this is just adding a little bit more of a contrast here between the white paper and our target. And I will go ahead and finish this part before I go ahead and give the writing instrument to my student so that they can trace along these highlighted lines. And they can use some good radial precision here with these smaller shapes. As we're tracing along, we want to make sure that we're using our fingers to move the writing instrument as opposed to our entire hand for these small shapes. And then once we get into the bigger shapes, it is appropriate to start using some gross motor skills as we complete our larger shapes here. So we're not using as much radial precision here, but we are keeping our arms stabilized on the table as we complete some of these larger shapes also. Now we can jump straight into coloring the shapes if we want to, or what we can do is we can cut these shapes out now so that our writing surface is a little bit smaller when we go to color it in, so that we don't get to scribble all over the page. We really have to use just the cutout shape as a kind of a border to confine the area in which I color. So before I color, I am going to cut out my shapes. We want to be sure that we are orienting our scissors correctly, and we have our thumb in the thumb hole and maybe a couple fingers or three in the other side here. And we want to have a lot of visual attention to the target. If we're not looking at our target, we really don't want to be using scissors. So this would be a time where we have to make an assessment of our students' skills. Should we put the scissors in their hand, or should we cut out these shapes for them? That's a decision that parents should be making. I will be cutting out these shapes myself because I want to just do this activity for myself. I don't have any students with me today, so I'll just be doing this myself here. Maybe I want to start with this, just kind of to separate them, and then I can have a little bit more precision with how I'm cutting. I'm using both hands together to cut around these arcs here. So I'm using some great bilateral coordination, maybe a little bit of deviation at the wrist or some pronation of the non-dominant hand as I go around this corner. And I can put that off to the side and finish the rest of my shapes. As we're cutting out our shapes, we really want to be as safe as possible with our students. So if your student is just learning how to use scissors, we really do want to provide hand-over-hand assistance as we're cutting so that we don't just kind of cut everywhere, that we have a little bit more precision with our cutting. So stabilizing your student's arm at the wrist will provide enough stabilization where they can really start to isolate their fine motor skills, and then we'll use our hand-over-hand assistance to guide them around corners and around some of the arcs, and really to start facilitating some of this pronation of the forearm here. So hand-over-hand assistance is encouraged for cutting out these shapes. Now that I have my shapes cut out, I'm ready to start coloring in the various feathers and my beak, which I'll probably color yellow. And let's see here, the neck and the head of the turkey, I'll just probably color brown or something of that nature. And then these feathers, I can just really color any color I want, because the turkey has some really colorful feathers. So before I start coloring, I want to be sure to clear out my visual field and place only one shape at a time into my visual field for coloring. So I'll remove all the face, the nose, the eyes, the neck, and the head out of the way, and I'm just going to work on some of these larger shapes here first with the feathers. So we're ready to start coloring now, and we can use some crayons and have a dynamic tripod grasp here with our thin writing instrument, this crayon, or we can use a thicker marker, which has a little bit of a thicker kind of handle to the writing instrument, or we can even use an even thicker a wider sort of writing instrument here with the Sharpie highlighter pen. So we get to choose which writing instrument we'd like to use, and generally the smaller the writing instrument, the more fine motor skill involvement that we'll be using. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to be switching throughout my coloring from crayons to markers, and just kind of using whatever I have here. I want to be sure that I'm using my non-dominant hand to stabilize the paper, and then I will begin coloring in my feathers and my turkey eyes and turkey body and turkey head and nose. So I've completed coloring in all of my feathers, the turkey nose, head, and eyes. And you'll notice that I went from the larger shapes to the smaller shapes. And as I went and colored in the smaller shapes, the fine motor and radial precision involvement increased. So if you want to increase your students' radial precision when they're coloring, make sure that you provide a smaller shape so that we have to really color inside of this small boundary here and use our fine motor precision and radial precision as we're coloring. I'm now ready to begin gluing on my turkey parts to my painted plate. And I will be sure to spread out my shapes here so that I have a larger visual field, and then I could work on some visual pursuits and scanning throughout my visual field from left to right, or we can just do one piece at a time and limit the visual field so that we don't have all of the other kind of distractions here from the other pieces of our turkey. But for me today, I want to work on scanning throughout my visual field from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to have my turkey body here, the paper plate that I painted. I'm going to have that right in the middle of my visual field below all of my turkey parts. So below the feathers, below the head and neck and eyes and beak. And then we will begin to glue on our turkey pieces to the back of the paper plate using our glue stick. So again, we're going to be working on our fine motor skills, holding the glue stick, maybe just work on pinching first, pinch, 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 and then pinch the glue stick, stabilizing our paper plate here with our non-dominant hand when we go to glue. So we'll go ahead and start that portion of the exercise now. Now that I have my feathers on, glued onto the back portion of my plate, I will begin to assemble the head of the turkey by first gluing on the neck. So I will move my turkey out of the way, get a bunch of glue all over the back of the neck. This kind of oval shaped piece right here. And we will put that on probably about right in the middle. We'll put that on right in the middle. We'll push it down, and then we will get the head of the turkey and glue that onto the neck. And we can work on our visual spatial skills and our spatial orientation. We want to make sure that we are matching here to our drawing here. We're going to use that as a visual cue if we need to. And then we will put on the turkey head. And then we will go and get the nose. Maybe I'll glue this turkey head down a little better. And then we'll get the nose and glue the triangle. And put the triangle pointing down like so. And then we will get the eyes and glue the eyes to the turkey head one at a time. And we will put the eyes on top of the turkey head. And then we're done. So here's my paper plate turkey that I made, and it looks like it's ready for Thanksgiving. It looks like it's totally ready to be part of my Thanksgiving feast this year. And we did this wonderful activity here while working on our fine motor skills with our paintbrush and our painting, our fine motor skills with our writing utensils, really working on some good visual spatial awareness, coloring inside of our boundary here with our different shapes. We've been working on our fine motor skills with our scissors as we cut out the shapes, and also some really good fine motor skills with our glue stick. And then we've been working on our bilateral coordination by stabilizing our turkey to the table here. We've been also working on our bilateral coordination with the placement of our paint across the midline of our body so that we're reaching across the midline of our body. And we've been working on our scanning ability as we're scanning throughout the visual field, and our visual pursuits as I place my turkey body below the other objects in the visual field here, so that we're looking from the top back down to the bottom, establishing some really great vertical visual pursuits as we go. Thanks for checking out my video. I hope you found it useful. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions on how to implement these strategies with your student.